So now we're going to get into understanding the intensities, understanding the volumes for each phase, and how that corresponds to what you guys should be implementing with your athletes. So organizing speed and stress, section A here. How to organize stress. We talked about this a lot in our free June 26th annual VH Speed and Performance Summit. But it's something to be noted here again. When you look at each phase of the sprint, so when I look at acceleration accumulation, when I look at power intensification, when I look at absolute speed realization, I'm looking at it from a stress standpoint. We're going to talk about the nitty-gritty X's and O's of training, but it does not matter if you cannot do this one job. If you cannot organize stress, you're done. Your programming does not matter. So looking at acceleration accumulation, we know this is lower CNS work. We know that it's higher PNS fatiguing because of all the aforementioned reasons above. We know we need more oxidative work. We need a more aerobic work to help replenish our alactic system to accumulate greater work capacity in bouts of force that we experience when we're trying to create torque during those first 0 to 2 steps, 0 to 5 steps, if you will. So here, lower CNS fatiguing because again, we're not experiencing the most motor units used that we experience in later phases such as absolute speed realization. Higher PNS fatiguing because we're experiencing greater ranges of motion plus resistance when looking at weighted sprints, when looking at power variations that are weighted and unilateral variations. So we know that we're going to have more localized tissue damage, more localized soreness. This is why we need to improve aerobic work here to help recover and help with those bouts of training. Moving on to power intensification. We know that we need moderate CNS stress. This is again because now ground contact time is decreasing, force is increasing, moving at higher velocity. So this is going to tax us more neurologically. Now, moderate PNS fatigue, this is because shorter ranges of motion. I'm not taking that joint and lever through a full range of motion. So I'm not going to get as much concentric and eccentric action as I'm going to experience in earlier phases of acceleration. This is now more alactic and lactic. You would ask, well, why lactic? Because of the anaerobic speed reserve, right? Being able to repeatedly sprint at sub-max speeds is technically lactic work. If I'm not running my best time, that's prolonging time. And prolonging time is tapping into a different energy system that we talked about in our stress and energy system development. Now, moving on here to our absolute speed realization, this is the highest CNS stress. This is why we talked about in the aforementioned lecture that I want to remove volume. So I'm trying to remove volume here because I know that it's the most stressful thing that I'm going to experience. Not a lot of PNS fatigue because of shorter ranges of motion, the removed volume. And now this is just completely pure alactic work. Why though? Because there's an inverse relationship between time. I'm no longer at sub-max speeds. I'm running as fast as I can. I'm trying to accumulate the best time. So I need glycogen readily available to be able to generate energy and perform that alactic task, which is sprinting, moving at max velocity. So understanding stress here and how to undulate stress and remove it is extremely important. So the key takeaway for this lecture is knowing that in earlier phases, you can handle more volume, you can handle greater ranges of motion, and you're going to need the oxidative work to help recover between those bouts of sprinting sessions. In power intensification, I begin to build upon my acceleration. That's becoming more stressful. I'm going to experience less PNS fatigue, but I'm going to be in better shape because I have greater work capacity developed in my earlier phases. As I go to my absolute speed realization, I know that this is extremely neurologically taxing. I experience low PNS fatigue, and as a byproduct of that, this is completely alactic, so I need to ensure that my nervous system is ready to recover in between these bouts of training.
85% of hamstring injuries happen, any of us, no matter what sport you play, if you're trying to transition from acceleration to top speed, right? 85%, so meaning like if you hit and you take off to first base, you accelerate, you pop up, hamstring injury. If I'm playing basketball, I take off on a fast break, I'm accelerating to top speed, hamstring injury. Football, same thing, right? 85% of hamstring injuries about happen in that transition period. So all of these drills we're doing is like bulletproofing your body to be able to handle. In 3 weeks, you guys could be running 30 and 40-yard sprints. So now, if I'm here on the line, right? This is what's called an ankle dribble, right? It's a little bit higher. So we just went from here, now I'm here. right? So this is an ankle dribble. You're going to do an ankle dribble to 5 yards. Once my first group gets to 5, I walk it out. Now I'm going to do what's called a calf dribble. So now I'm a little bit higher, right? But my transition goes from here, right? Before it was here, now it's here. It's a little bit higher. I'm going to walk it out. My last transition is going to be a high knee. Does that make sense? Right? So it's ankle, walk it out, right? Calf, walk it out, and then high knee as high as I bring my leg to the last line. Go ahead, first group.
Looking here, organizing speed and stress part 2, how to manage volume. So this is the #1 way to mitigate fatigue outside of intensity. Managing volume in earlier phases, our distances are going to be between 10 and 15 yards. 300-yard volume max per given session, or over the course of the week is what we recommend. So example, if you sprint 10 yards, that's going to potentially be 30 10-yard sprints, but you can't perform all of those in one session. So you might need to perform 15 sprints on day 1, 15 sprints on day 2, but these also include warm-up sprints. So this is just total exposure to the task at hand. This is the volume range that you should adhere to. Moving on to power intensification. 15 to 25 yards is the distance, so we know that it's a little bit further. So for here, your volume is going to be between 250 and 300 yards. So you would say, well, that's the same as the acceleration accumulation, but it's not, because my distance is greater, so my total sets per workout will be less. If I'm sprinting 25 yards in this power intensification phase, well then if that's 250 yards per week, that's only 10 total sprints that I'm sprinting in that week for improving my sprint exposure. Moving on to my absolute speed realization. Now my distances are the absolute furthest and my volume is the absolute least. So 150 to 200 yards, using the example of a 40-yard sprint, you're probably not sprinting more than 1 to 2 of those in a given week. And they should probably be on the same day to help allocate and kind of confine that experience of stress, that experience of CNS fatigue that's going to transpire over the next 48 to 72 hours. But if I'm running lower distances, 20 to 25 yards, I can accumulate a little bit more volume here, maybe 3 to 4 sprints of 25 yards, because what we found is as you begin to exceed these volume numbers, your times and your weekly averages will go down from week to week here. So that's important, understanding stress and understanding your volume before you can even get into exercise templates and exercise selection for your programming.